you think about you will be reflected in almost everything you do. In fact, you can't avoid it. You're a part of all you do, and how you feel about you is reflected in what you do, the attitude you take, the way you respond to behavior, the way you respond to your people. It's even reflected in the motivations of your work. You're a part of this that makes you do what you do. Now, of course, we could become introspective to a point of injury, and yet, on the other hand, we can run away from ourselves to a point of disastrous injury to a lot of people. We don't want to overdo sitting down and being in misery about ourselves, but we want to at least come to know where we are. And this, I think, is highly important. Where we are isn't as important as to know where we are. And I think if we can come to see ourselves where we are through His eyes, and then where we can be through His power and grace, then in a strange way, I say strange advisedly, I think we're led to meet the requirements to fulfill this image that He gives to us. If you have not observed this, I'd like to recommend it to you. That if you have an image of what is to be or can be and release it to the Holy Spirit, then I think you are led to meet the requirement to fulfill it. I've watched this a long time. It works in the great things. It works in the little things. It's, to me, one of the most dynamic things I've ever observed. When I read Viktor Frankl's book, The Doctor and the Soul, I noticed that he said if you love somebody, really love somebody, and not project your self-hate, which often is sometimes in the form of symbiotic union, and therefore it may be sadistic or it may be masochistic. But if you really love somebody, what happens is you have an image of what this person can be, and the person then becomes the fulfillment of that image. And when I read that, I said, well, this is so much akin to what I've observed, which I can't prove, but for which I have profound evidence, that we invited Viktor Frankl to First Community. And when I met him, and as we shared together, I understood that while our backgrounds were very different, we'd come to the same conclusion. And in the witness of us both, it seemed to be established. Now, I think this is awfully important to each of us, to try to come one day to see where we are. And this vision is clearest, of course, when it is seen through His eyes. And how does this come to be? Well, it comes to be oftentimes through the help of others. And that's why group therapy and group sharing has a great validity. It comes to sharing with one understanding person. It can come in meditation. It can come in revelation and meditation. It can come through a study of the Scriptures. It can come often in sharing the writings of a person who has written out of experience and not out of real theory. But it can come. And when it comes, then to see it. And sometimes it's difficult to see it, because oftentimes it's too painful. A man with great sensitivity today pointed out in the therapy group that maybe there be those here who would rather leave. And I was not sensitive enough to say this. I just was so engrossed in the process that for the time being I forgot the people in the process, which can happen to me, maybe not to you, but it happened to me. But here was a sensitive one. Whether he himself hurt or not is not important. But the fact that he was aware that men in the group might hurt. I was in a therapy group in Norfolk, and I sent Dr. Freeman the results of the first statements of the men in this process, and I think he'll agree it was a remarkable revelation. For in this group, there was, for instance, a man who was a star in Norfolk, one of the great stars, and was envied by many ministers, and resented, really, resented. And yet they felt guilty, they resented it. But yet in feeling guilty, the very guilt motivated them to continue to do the thing that created the guilt in the beginning, because it was not dealt with. But when he bared his heart there before the group, it was painful for him. You know, he broke out in a cold sweat. Great beads of sweat came out in his forehead. It was painful. Motivated them. And he told me later that he never thought he'd have the nerve to say to his brethren what he said. And he said, I wanted to say it for a long time, and I never was free until that morning. But even when I became free, it was very painful. But it was even painful for men in the group. And one man walked out right in the middle of his talk, and he couldn't take it. And this, we accepted. Perhaps the most difficult thing in the world is for a man to see where he is. But if he can come to see where he is by the grace of the Lord and accept this, then he's ready, really. Then he's ready. And you're looking at a person who ran from himself a long time and buried myself in work. You're looking at a person who had a profound neurotic sense of duty and who played golf. And I had all kinds of physical symptoms. And I ended up not having the package I was peddling. And this is pretty disturbing for a minister one day to have to come to admit that he not only doesn't have the package he's peddling, but he doesn't know that he hasn't that package. And this, he does not, more than likely the insightful people around him know it. And then the people he's trying to minister to oftentimes have to try to minister to him. And yet this should be true in a Protestant fellowship. So to come to this image of the self, this thought of the self, in terms of where we are now and where we can be, is one of the most important things I know. In a Protestant, I believe if we can become the relationship here in which the Holy Spirit has maximum freedom to do its work, that it'll be a transforming experience with those of us who've made the greatest spiritual progress. I've gone through these experiences again and again, and then get letters from ministers who would say something like this: I never felt before I was a person. Well, which is to say, I was taking a role that really wasn't true to my real nature. And to be a person, after all, is the goal of the free world, isn't it? To be a person. But what kind of a person? Well, to be a person through whom God can fulfill his real purpose. If I understand him as he reveals his nature and method in my Lord, it seems clear to me that he works in all the rest of his creation. But when it comes to man, he works in and through man. And if he can't, by his own choice, he is lost. Now, there are two kinds of churches. I intimated to a small group the other day. Those that work on people, and I think they're rackets. And those that work in and through people, and I think they're the real thing. And I said, to me, this is one of the profound insights that was recovered from the early church by John Wesley. What happens between people and through people is far more important than what happens to people. Now, I've observed this. If the right thing happens between people, the right thing will happen inside of people, and then the right thing will happen through people. And in the end, then, the right thing happens to them. I've observed this across a quarter of a century, that if a child is born to two people who know each other, and therefore the right thing happens between the parents and the child will grow naturally into freedom. He'll grow naturally into the freedom of a healthy mind and healthy body, the only ramparts of peace the world has. If the wrong thing happens between him and his parents, therefore the wrong thing happens inside of him, therefore the wrong thing happens to him, and you end up having a sick child. I've been dealing for a year and a half with a girl who's now 14, whom one of the finest Christian psychiatrists in America gave up. Said, Roy, there's no hope. You're wasting your time. I can't take the parents' money. I said, well, why don't you work for nothing then? Well, he said, I don't have time. Well, I said, okay, well, I'll try. Well, he said, you're just wild enough in your faith to try, so go ahead and waste your time. Now, why did he say there was no hope? Well, here's a girl who wet the bed. She was, at 12, she weighed 180. She now, at 14, weighs about 130. She wouldn't study. She had a compulsion on candy. She stole. She smoked. She lied. She really was a psychopath in about all the fronts. But why? Well, she was adopted, but the first 2 years she was boarded by people who didn't love her. She was left lie on her back and on a pillow, and when we got her for adoption, her ears stood straight out, and she had no plaything but her ears. Now, you see, the wrong thing happened between her and those who cared for her, and therefore the wrong things happened inside of her. And therefore the wrong things now happen through her. She's a psychopath. Now, I have worked with her, and I've gotten 2 girls to collaborate with her. And this last year, she passed her grade with an average of B. She has not smoked. So far as we know, she has not stolen. And she's gotten off with a compulsion of candy. She still eats fattening things, but she's come a way down now. She's beginning to really look pretty good, and she has a sense of being a person. I was with her in camp a week ago, and she said, you know, up until a couple months ago, I felt I was a victim. But now I have a feeling I'm a queen. And really, in the deepest sense, every girl is meant to be a queen, and if she isn't, she'll get sick. Now, it all depends on all the feelings that go into this feeling of being a queen. She could be a queen on a narcissistic level, or she could be a queen on a real level of love. This girl is coming through. Now, I've done little. The greatest thing I did was to take her mother, who's a perfectionist, off of her back, because her mother was always going around her psychological guard and putting pressure on her, see. And the mother would say to me, now, her younger sister, she talks back. She fights back. But naming this girl, she doesn't fight back. I said, yes, she does. She wets the bed. So, you see, what I did was try to create a relationship in the home so that between the mother and father and the girl, the right thing would begin to happen. But the great thing that happened, 2 girls took an interest in her, began to love her and get her out and take care of her and help her set limits, because she didn't know how to set limits. And if anybody, if God used anybody to help the girl, he used those 2 girls. And between them, the right things began to happen, so that the right things now happen in her, and therefore the right things are beginning to happen through her. Now, if I understand how God works, it is on this basis. He works in us and through us, and he can't, by his own choice, he's blocked. If parents don't feed a baby will not live. If parents don't love a baby may actually not live, because there's case in record where a baby expired because it was not loved. But as I said last night, I've never seen a sick child where there wasn't a denial of love, where love wasn't withheld. And I've never seen a healthy child where the love was not freely given. And when we look at the world about us, this begins to have profound meaning. Because if God can't work through us, then if by his own choice he's blocked, and if the Protestant church is a relationship where a few people are doing a lot of things to people, well, what is the result? Well, the result is this, that attendance at service is a substitute for thinking and action, and joining the church is a substitute for Christian living. And people, in a sense, are used by us in a process where we perform. But unless the sermon starts where they are and is a process through which we're going with them, and we'll talk about this later, well, then really maybe nothing happens. And so if they do not get to the point of witnessing, then does anything happen? If they don't get to the point of witnessing, then God's purpose is blocked as far as they're concerned. And so to become a person through whom he can work seems to me to be the supreme goal of life. Now, I think it goes even further. And incidentally, this means that we may have to rethink the whole method of the Protestant church. And so to become a person through... And we may get to this in due time. You're talking about action with Paul Worley and others. We're talking about broadcasting and other things. But we may have to rethink the whole method of the church, which means that we will move from talking at people to creating more and more relationships where we're working creatively with people. Even in the sermon, we're talking with them and going through a process with them. In the spirit, maybe, where they feel, in a sense, they're having a conversation with us. Now, at this point, there are two things I'm led to say. I have a feeling, and in our free world in America, there are two things that are enemies of the becoming of the self through whom God can work. Well, one is, I believe there's a growing national dependency. This means that people do not move from dependency through interdependency to a responsible and wholesome independency. Now, what is my evidence for this? Well, our state hospitals are packed to the door. Our private sanitariums are full. Every counselor I know, as far as anything, is overwhelmed. We recently have put a psychiatrist, a professional psychiatrist in our staff. You know why? We had no place to refer people. We couldn't refer anybody to anybody because everybody was overloaded. All our counseling agencies in Columbus are overwhelmed. Here's a family that has maybe a compulsive child, or a hostile child, or some other symptom where the child needs help and the parents need help. And they go to one of the agencies and they say, well, we can't take you for 8 months. And our church just could not let people dangle. So we had no choice but hire a Christian psychiatrist. And now we can take care of some of these people that our staff neither had the time or the ability, really, to deal with. Now, this is one sign, but there are many other signs of this dependency. For instance, there's a profound problem with authority all over America. People are either fighting the father figure or they're hunting a substitute father. All over America run into this, young girls getting involved with older men. Now why? They never had a father. They're hunting a father substitute, and the older man is too stupid really to know they're hunting the father, think they want to love him. And they will sleep with him in order to get a father. Now this is a national peril. Again, homosexuality is a threat to our culture. Stecker pointed out that when homosexuality is increased, culture is disintegrating. And what does this mean? Well, the boy or the girl does not develop through the homosexual state into the heterosexual state. Now, why not? Well, even a great man like Dr. Henry isn't too sure of the reason. I've observed a number of things. Every homosexual or bisexual or supreme narcissist I've dealt with, I saw the evidence of an unfulfilled father wish. Now, why not? And look, I maybe am taking too much time with this, but I think as ministers this is profoundly important. Think how little time the average boy has with his father. This is number one. Oftentimes the father comes home and is either detached or he's the authority figure who pushes the child around but doesn't have a relationship. Now the father ought to set limits and set them firmly, but if he sets them firmly and is not in fellowship with his children, then he's an intruder. Hazel and I were at our son-in-law and daughter's home not long ago, and the three grandsons had an argument who was going to sit next to Pat. And they couldn't settle it because three can't sit next to one person. And the father believes in setting limits. He said, sit down or you get the back of my hand. Now, I wouldn't recommend just this farm, but this is his farm. And they sat down. And they were relieved. You know why they were relieved? Because they didn't want to slight Pat. So he had to take the blame because one couldn't be next to me. They weren't squelched. They understood. Why? Because they loved him. And he knew they knew he loved them. And after dinner, where was he? Down in the basement making bird feeders with them. I wasn't sure who the boy was. But you see, this is not typical across, maybe in your rural homes it is. Moreover, think how rarely a boy meets a man in the educational system. There's a growing number of men in the elementary grades and in the high school grades, but still it's predominantly women. And I love women, but I also love men. I go into church schools all over America. Most of the teachers in church schools are women. And oftentimes they're there out of ottedness. They're there out of ottedness and not because they love. They're exceptions. One look at them, Dr. Jordan, and you would know whether they're there out of the tyranny of the should, whether they're because they really love. Now, if they're there because they love, this is one thing. If they're there out of otterness, this is another thing. But rarely do you see a man in the lower grades of the church school. And you would know. And so what we have? Well, we have on the one hand a resistance to authority, and it's all across America. It's in church staffs. But on the other hand, we have people hunting a father, men and women. And this means that all things can happen in human relations. A boy, for instance, grows up, and he's still a little boy. And there's a little boy in every one of them. When four people get married, or two people get married, or four people go to bed. The child of the past and the man, and the child of the past and the woman. And when they deal with their child, there are four people dealing with one child. And this is a complicated situation. And no wonder children are baffled by such a situation. But here's the little boy, see, never had a chance to grow up. I have permission to say this. I talked with one of my younger brothers and listened to him a while, and I finally said, put my finger on something. He said, yes, that's right. Now, it's very interesting to watch this and see it, and as we listen to people long enough, we begin to see some of these patterns. Now, if it's true, well, you can go further. All across America, people are baffled by the fact that employees want security. I met with president of 13 American corporations last November, and we had 3 hours together. We were going to spend an hour and a half, and we stayed 3 hours. One of them finally broke down and said, you know, we searched the country for employees. We finally isolated 6 and interviewed them, and of the 6, 5 started talking about our retirement policy. And all of them were under 35. Only one started talking about the opportunity. And this is a basic trend. And what's wrong? Where does the fault lie? If one doesn't grow from dependency through interdependency to wholesome and responsible independency, is there then not a breakdown in the whole basic structure of a free world? And could it be that Russia will beat us at the most vulnerable point? That she will get an inner motivation, believing in outer direction, that we do not get, believing in inner direction? Is there then not a breakdown in the whole basic structure? And this becomes a very basic question. Now, there's a second trend in America that is, to me, a very profound one. This was made so vivid by one of my younger brothers, Wallace Hamilton. This winter, I went to hear him preach one day, and he preached, I forgot the topic, but I remember the thought. He said, in America, everybody's asking what they can get out of it. What is there in it for me? And then he elaborated this. Then I went on ahead of where he was, and I don't know where he even finished. And this is no criticism of Wallace Hamilton. This is a great compliment to him because he set me going. And I left him and told him afterwards I left him. Because it then dawned upon me that the goal of life is not to get and keep. Because if this is the goal of life, to get and keep, one can find a quality of peace, but he'll commit spiritual suicide, become a vegetable, a cadaver. And now he's only responding to outside stimuli. And he commits spiritual suicide. The goal of life is not to get and to keep. The goal of life is to become. Become in Christ, the person through whom he can fulfill his purpose. And unless this can happen again, all that we claim for as Protestants will be unfulfilled. And I don't know where we can work this out. I think we need some real research projects in local churches here and there where we might work on these two basic questions and see how we can develop this. When we get into the threefold purpose of the church, perhaps we can think a little more about it. Now, I'd like to say one other thing. It seems to me that as I look at the way God works as revealed in Christ, that he has set all the rest of life in the precision of instinct. But when it comes to man, he says, you can finish the story any way you like. I've given you the infant restored from the Holy Spirit, and I've given you my revelation that he set all the rest of life in the story. There is no coercion about it. This is, to me, the basis of real life. Now then, if this is true, then the family and the church can, you see, become so significant. Because without them, I don't see any hope. For if the right things happen between the child and people, then you see the right thing happens in the child, then to the child, and he moves towards being finished. And the finishing only takes place before the end. Because this is the whole power of the reverse, that we move in the direction of the finishing in Christ. And when this is the direction, then you see we move toward the image, the right image. And what is the right image? Well, it's an image with the likeness of Christ. And what are some of the signs of this? Well, one sign is that we assume the love of people. Or let's put it this way. Let me backtrack and say, there are three signs. First, that living is marked by giving, not getting. By giving, not getting. And I have a feel the whole world is caught in a level of narcissism. Homosexuality is not the only sign. You run into it in almost every family problem. You run into it almost every problem of human relations. Somebody wants what he wants. By giving, not getting. Somebody wants what he wants. That is, he's focused in himself. So this is the first likeness of the Christ image, that living is marked by giving, not getting. Second, living is marked by caring, not ignoring. By caring, not ignoring. Now, but just look at this in the family relationship. How many wives feel that the husband doesn't care? And how many husbands feel the wife doesn't care? Well, this runs all across America. My beloved, I just meet woman after woman walk across the city to hear a kind word. And men, and children, and employees, and pupils. But there are millions of people across the world who think we don't care because they're negative. And do we care? Do we really care? If we cared, might we not stop all church construction for 2 years, raise a couple $2 billion, and give a profound witness to share insight across the world? Somebody said when the world's moving toward nuclear suicide, the church is strangely silent. This is true. This is true. Sometimes there's a national pronouncement. When it gets down to local church, strangely silent. You've read a lot of books of sermons and lots of magazines of sermons. How many sermons have you read this year on how to turn the tide from war to peace? The only minister I've noticed doing this is Harold Boswell. Now, there may be some others, Frank Law and Walter Judd, and I don't agree with Walter Judd or something, but at least he's talking, and talking fast. And he's got a passion, caring, not ignoring. And may I be very personal? If we could ever care for each other as brother pastors, one of these demonstrations that Bill, I forget, Bill, who did this with you? Bill and, what was it, Floyd? Or Burley? You see, it's amazing to me as I mingle with ministers, and this is what I'm doing mainly now, ministering to ministers. How when they get off, they